Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and welcome to part 2 of our exploration of Asian horror films released in 2019. As usual, we've survived the worst movies when covering part 1, at least in my opinion, so the titles we're discussing tonight are better than the ones we covered in the last video. And remember, titles for all the movies I discussed will be listed in the description box below. So let's get rolling here. We begin in the Philippines with The Entity, also known as Kuwaresma. Alright? So this little plot synopsis was paraphrased from the website Voices from the Balcony. It's 1985. Luis is attending university, studying engineering when his father Arturo calls. His twin sister Manuela is dead, and he needs to come home for the funeral. Once home, however, things take a sinister turn. Neither his father nor his mother will tell him how his sister died. A strange woman gives him a cryptic warning at the funeral, and then Manuela's ghost begins attacking him. So this film actually begins with a short scene in 1965, with a cheesy holiday song, but the mood changes to horror pretty fast when a man goes crazy. Not a big horror set piece, but instead a quick scene to establish that bad things happened in the past and are somehow related to the events in 1985. This is a pretty slow-paced movie with a basic plot. The story is really not all that interesting, but it does a decent job of kind of bridging the scares. The father is a major jerk and very unhinged psychologically, a complete nutcase, and he kind of provides a lot of the, human conflict. So at least you have him to kind of anchor the film to create kind of like this disturbing vibe that's going on. This was directed by Erik, who also did On the Job and Buy Bust. Lighting is on the bland side in this, though, with minimal color. It's very drab visually, which I found disappointing because, say what you want about Buy Bust, very divisive film, but the lighting in that movie was very atmospheric and colorful. We don't get that here. Still, there are a good number of scares in this. There's a creepy scene involving a bedsheet. The ghost does attack our main character, but not necessarily attempting to kill him, so there's something going on there. And there are some corpse shots and a few weird-looking ghosts and ghouls. A few freaky vision scenes and even a few acts of bloody violence. Unfortunately, there are a decent number of jump scares, which I generally dislike, and the big finale is a cliche. I'll leave it at that. Alright, we've seen it many times in horror movies over the years, but, it is what it is. But there is a grittiness and downbeat tone to this movie, which is commendable. Sometimes horror movies can't manage the tone well, but this one does a good job. Good overall quality, just not that memorable, and it's not elite in terms of entertainment value, but still pretty good. So I moderately recommend The Entity. You can find this on Amazon streaming, so pretty easy to find. A lot of the films we're covering tonight are, more often than not, pretty easy to find. Alright, our next film here. Where are we going to next? Taiwan. Alright, so this is called The Ninth Precinct. Alright, this is a Taiwanese crime thriller horror hybrid. And this little plot synopsis was taken from Not Only Hollywood. A policeman who can see ghosts begins to work for a secret agency where others have the same abilities as himself. This agency is primarily trying to help ghosts who haven't found peace after they died. He becomes acquainted with a female journalist who tries to find her friend who has disappeared without a trace, and it turns out that there is an evil woman behind her disappearance. Now, they must stop her because she is so evil. Yes. So this blends different genres together, well enough to be watchable, okay? Crime drama, supernatural thriller, and a horror movie, all kind of wrapped into one. That creates a few interesting combinations during individual scenes. But I will say this, they could have probably been even more creative and inspired because there really aren't any big, memorable, individual horror scenes that stick in your mind after watching this, you know what I mean? The ghosts are a mix of good-natured and bad-natured. They kind of interject themselves into situations when you actually may not expect them to as well. And there are some weird ghost designs in this too, which is nice to see. We get a few hand-to-hand fight scenes, actually, near the end of the film. And they are pretty good, but nothing great. Story has a few dull patches, and the villain is like a wafer-thin caricature, just total one note. But those flaws, do prevent this from being a strong recommendation. But again, I think this movie is watchable, and if you like genre benders, The Ninth Precinct is a decent watch. And it's currently available on Netflix. All right, very easy to find again. All right, moving along here. Not a ton to say about that one. But this next one here, we go to Japan. All right. And that is The Howling Village. Okay. A young psychologist heads to an infamous haunted place named Howling Village in order to find out her family's dark history. The film centers on a village at the end of a forgotten tunnel where people have disappeared. A wall was built over it in an effort to erase the past, but the film looks into where the people went, what happened to them, and why the place is called Howling Village. Now, this was directed by Takashi Shimizu, who, is a big name in Japanese horror. This also stars Ayaka Miyoshi, the same lead actress as Dance With Me, and she also appeared in Alice in Borderland, so you may have seen her around. She plays a pretty one-note character in Howling Village, but she does what she can to elevate her content that she's dealing with. And we also get Megumi Okina has a small role, and she was in some big Japanese horror movies about 20 years ago. Now, one of the bigger negatives in this film are the younger male actors. They're very average in their acting ability, and their expressions and strong emotion are generally unconvincing. So you got to rely on the ladies to carry this one, and they do a good enough job. Now, the opening scene is partially shot documentary style. Pretty good stuff. I like the decrepit look of the village and the sound of rabid dogs. The sound design in this movie is pretty good. There's a fun death scene during the opening half hour involving a lookout tower. We also get some basic scares with ghosts standing in the background. Pretty good death involving a phone booth, and there's a spooky scene involving a film projector. Ghost design is slightly different here, with a wave blur effect over the bodies. They also attack in groups, which is rather unique. Some of them are elderly men with black eyes, but we do get some ghost women as well. And there's a cool humanoid monster near the end, which is probably the most memorable evil entity in the movie. You get some mild gore, nothing that should intimidate anyone. Pacing is a bit slow, does have some conventionality to it, like the story itself is fine, but nothing especially fascinating. The protagonists have little to no personality or nuance, as I've alluded to earlier, which is a problem, and it makes the film feel a little bit lethargic because of that. This doesn't drive interest in between the horror as much as it should, but it does come alive during its horror sequences, which is a good thing. Now, I did do a separate review of this on my channel a few years ago, so if you want more details, you could check it out. As is, this is a pretty good flick. Okay, we're kind of in the same level of quality right now. We've covered a few movies that are pretty good. Now, this is available on YouTube and Tubi, and I think there's like a Blu-ray and DVD floating around out there for this one as well. All right, now I think we take a step up in terms of quality. All right, the first video we did a lot of mostly crap, I think, if I remember correctly. This one, we're doing some pretty good stuff, and now we're getting to some good stuff, legit good stuff coming up. Some of this is kind of creative and unique movies, too, coming up. So, we'll go back to Japan with Dancing Mary. This is a dramatic horror movie. And this plot synopsis was taken from V Cinema Show. We follow laid-back civil servant Kenji Fujimoto, who breezes through listless days avoiding work and picking up his paycheck. His routine comes to an end when he's given a nightmare assignment no one else in the office wants, overseeing the demolition of a cursed Showa-era dance hall. It seems like an impossible situation, but fate moves in mysterious ways as a desperate Kenji overhears coworkers talking about a high school girl named Yukiko who is being bullied due to her psychic powers. So fateful timing creates an odd partnership as he now has a way to interact with the dead and make the ghost move on, while Yukiko uses her skill to help the lost souls go to paradise. So we have another big-time director being showcased in this video. Sabu directed this one. And I reviewed a bunch of his stuff on this channel. Miss Zombie was one of my favorite horror movies of the early 2010s. He directed that. So that was back in 2013. Now, Dancing Mary has like a deliberately paced but engaging story. So it's better than the movies we've talked about already tonight in terms of story. Pretty good character work in this, with a reliance on dialogue, and they meet a variety of ghosts along the way. The interaction's pretty neat. There's even a ghost fight scene at one point, and near the end there's a fairly sad story regarding the romance between two of the ghosts. Dramatically effective enough, and it touches on enough different elements to keep you in it. Some bits of humor are peppered in. Does have a spooky vibe at times. The horror content in this one is more thematic and atmospheric instead of visceral scares, jumps, and violence. However, some expert sound design and editing go a long way to add an uncomfortable feeling to many spots in this film. So it is sufficiently intense enough to be classified as a horror hybrid film. The imagery shifts to black and white photography and cinematography for certain sections where the male lead can see the ghosts. Interesting little movie here. Goes under the radar. Did not get an official release in the West, I don't think. But it's much different than your typical horror flick, and it is available on Daily Motion. Okay, it is available on Daily Motion, I believe, with subtitles too. So if it sounds interesting, probably make this one a priority, because when movies are on Daily Motion, sometimes they stay up there forever, and sometimes they're taken down. So hopefully this gets a release in the West at some point, though. But we're staying in Japan again for the next few films. The next one is not one, but two sequels to a film I covered a while back in this playlist. And that is Bloody Chainsaw Girl Part 2 and 3, Giko Awakens, and Revenge of Nero. 2019. This is a action comedy horror hybrid, and this plot synopsis was taken from Asian Movie Pulse. After barely surviving an assassination attempt, chainsaw-wielding schoolgirl Giko Nokomura learns that she has attracted the attention of rival Nero Aoi, who has been sending killer cyborgs after her. When her friend Asako becomes involved in the struggle to stop Nero's rampage, they end up back at their school to learn more about her and meet up with the last of her cyborgs. And yada yada yada, more cyborgs and evil people show up, and they battle. So Hiroki Yamaguchi returns to the director's seat here. None of the actresses return, I don't believe, unfortunately, which could be a problem on paper because they were quite likable in that first Bloody Chainsaw Girl movie. In fact, it's one of the main reasons why I like the movies, because the actresses were quite charismatic and funny. I think the new actresses in these sequels do a good job, but I think the other actresses were better. Now, Part 2, Giko Awakens, kind of opens with this brief fight and some fun opening credits that are similar to the original film. The school uniforms are hilarious because they're dressed like prisoners, and it did kind of feel like way in real life, if we're being honest. But yes, it's quite humorous. Now, the chainsaw itself continues to have a completely absurd design. And I think they use CGI to make it rotate, if you pay attention, but I love the design of the chainsaw. It looks just crazy. Lots of bloody violence in these movies, which is nice, but it's a mix of CGI and practical. Most of the blood sprays are CGI, just so you know. But they have some other weird, weaponry. Like, they use glow sticks in one scene that I thought was quite creative and kind of fun. One girl has tentacle vine abilities, where the tentacle vines, blow up from the ground and attack our protagonist, and they use a lot of practical effects for that, which I very much appreciated. So I think there's enough practical effects in this to help you, overcompensate for the CGI. And get some nice bloody death scenes. So I think that the second film, Giko Awakens, is a nice continuation of the franchise. And then when you get to Revenge of Nero, it starts off on a bus with an attack scene, and then more fun opening credits. The opening credits have like a punk vibe to it. They play, I think the band that did the music for this was Maximum the Hormone, I think was what they're called. I've listened to some of their stuff, and it's pretty good. So if you're a fan of them, I think that's a reason to watch this. And, I have to emphasize, these movies could get pretty wacky and cheesy, and you do get some brief nudity and some panty shots, which some of these low-budget Japanese movies always feel the need to throw in. But it has enough energy and charm to make it work. There's a character with invisibility powers in the third film, and then, you get a chainsaw versus chainsaw fight, and that's always fun. So, I think, the main conflict is resolved at the end, but it says to be continued, so they may have just been a joke, or maybe they plan on making more of these, I'm not sure. In either case, I liked both of these movies. Parts 2 and 3 are 54 minutes and 52 minutes long, respectively, with a total runtime of 106 minutes, and you do need to watch both, I think. So they're about the length of a regular movie. Dialogue could not be assessed, though. Okay, these were viewed without subtitles. So, who knows? Maybe I would have liked these as much as the first film, depending on the dialogue, because the dialogue in the first film was quite funny. But as they stand, I prefer the first film more than 2 and 3, but 2 and 3 are pretty good. Now, the availability of this, you're going to have to go back to... I think they're only available on Region 2 DVD with no subs, unfortunately. This is one where it's not great availability on this one. I'm sure you can find it online if you really look, on the dark web, if you know what I mean. But, yeah. Hopefully this, who knows, somebody will release this at some point in the future. Now, the next two films, all right, are, I would say, superior to the ones we just covered. And that is Black Maiden, Chapter Q and Chapter A. And this is from Japan. Okay, another 2-part film here. Orphan girl May is adopted by a wealthy family and receives a ticket out of the orphanage. The girl finds herself with a sister who has arrived at the family under similar circumstances. They bond and become close. Things take a turn for the worse, however, when the family's fortunes take a nosedive, allowing them to keep no more than one of the girls. And that means someone has to trot back to the orphanage. Well, neither is volunteering. Alright, so you start with Chapter Q, alright? This is the first part of the story. It's about 1 hour and 6 minutes long. Opening half is a bit slow, a lot of dinner table scenes, but there are some pretty good moments. Again, this one does not have English subtitles, and I know some people might get annoyed with this, that I'm even covering these movies, but I kind of have to if I want to get most of these Japanese horror movies in. So, this one, again, no subtitles, but the story's pretty interesting. It blends in a few different elements from different kinds of horror films. So it's not strictly one kind of horror film, and you can still tell what's going on in these. One scene is a rather perverted act of intimacy between the parents. Also, it turns out that their foster parents have been deriving pleasure from seeing the despairing faces of children they adopted and initially made happy. And there are a few instances of violence in this, but nothing excessive. A few entertainingly scary moments later on as well. And the lighting in this is quite nice for a low-budget flick. You get some vibrant blues and yellows mixed in, here and there. So, Chapter Q is kind of like the setup, but it kind of progresses the whole story at the same time. So, when you watch Chapter A after this, it's 80 minutes long, and it's a parallel film. So, it operates... I almost think this operates the same way as the Dorome films that I covered. I forgot what year those came out. Late 2000s, 2010s. But you almost like watch one film and then you watch the other one and it covers the same events, but you see it from a different perspective. You know what I mean? So when you watch Chapter A here, things make more sense as to what was happening in Chapter Q. And there's some very interesting twists in this. Far more engaging story right from the start. So it needs to be judged as an entire film. Because if you just watch Chapter A and you leave it, or Chapter Q and you leave it, you're going to be like, I don't know, these aren't very good. But then you watch Chapter A and you're like, okay, now I get it, right? And I would say like the horror elements in this are a little bit stronger. There's some domestic abuse and violence near the beginning. The story goes in some unexpected directions, and there are more creepy moments. Scenes involving creepy masks, a few little surprises. The final shot kind of freaked me out, too. So, all in all, this is like a 2.5-hour movie, surprisingly engaging story, and some cool moments. And I like both of the lead actresses, too. Yeah, but unfortunately, it's only available without subtitles, but I still recommend it if you could get your hands on it. Now, I blind bought these, the Japanese DVDs without subtitles, which, again, if you want to go the DVD route with the Bloody Chainsaw Girl and Black Maiden, it's going to be expensive, especially on Yes Asia, all right? So, if you could find them streaming somewhere on the dark web or whatever, that's probably your best option. But again, I would say if you're going to choose any film tonight to watch so far, I think it would be Dancing Mary and Black Maiden would be the ones to check out so far. But we got a few more to cover here. We got to hit Korea up, obviously. You know, Korea still makes horror movies, so we gotta keep rolling. So we go to South Korea for the next one here, and that is Warning: Do Not Play. Okay, so we get Mi Jung, played by So Yi-ji, is a rookie film director. She's been preparing a horror film for years. One day she hears about a movie which was banned when it was screened, and half the crowd ran out of the cinema in terror, and a person died of a heart attack. This is like the legend, right? So she wants to know more about the film to get some inspiration, so she searches for it. And, there's certain people who warn her not to do this, but she doesn't care. And this leads to bizarre and horrible events. Now, I first saw this movie a few years ago. I did not do a separate review of it, even though it was one of the bigger releases of the year, because I just thought it was okay, you know. But I will say this, upon my second viewing recently, I liked it more than I did the first time. So our protagonist is this fan of horror movies. She drinks huge cans of beer, makes her somewhat relatable and likable. But she's under intense pressure to hand in a script within the next month, or her career may be over before she even hits it big. So her story is rather basic and cliche, but it works. The lead actress holds the screen well. She gives a good performance in this, and I think she has a different vibe to her. I can't explain it. Maybe it's her style or the way she acts, but I liked her. Now, the horror scenes in this movie are pretty good, okay? The opening scene, set in a darkened movie theater, relies on suspense and some sound design, similar to something you'd see in a Korean horror film around the mid-2000s, because it uses ghosts in familiar ways, but I enjoyed it. You get a few clips from the legendary movie that drove everyone crazy, as shown in the film. It does have a creepy feel, the human-like shadow on the wall and stuff like that, but not especially memorable or creative. Like, we all remember the images from Ring, right? Or even the Blair Witch Project. These are not quite as impactful. I do like the apartment scenes where our protagonist searches her residence because she hears weird noises and she thinks something's inside. There are some additional found footage sequences, as well as a few bloody deaths. And the final half hour is basically a bunch of horror scenes stacked on top of one another. So, the pacing's pretty good here. It's just that the horror scenes themselves are not elite. They're not. But it does engage in other ways. The likable protagonist's research and tracking down the movie is actually entertaining. Remember, this deals with a nutcase director, and that provides some good suspense and moments where she's trying to find the film. You might get some human conflict blended in. And one of the highlight sequences is her actually acquiring the film. And the very end is pretty good, I think. Somewhat thought-provoking. Production values are good. The night scenes use a red tint very nicely. Very odd shade of red as well. Quite beautiful. And this is less than an hour and a half long. So, Warning, Do Not Play. I enjoy it more now than I did when I first saw it. I think it's just a brisk film. It has a few fun scenes to it. Not an elite film, but it's I think it's a decent popcorn flick. Now, it is available on YouTube, Amazon, and other streaming sites. So this one's easy to find. Easy to find. Now, we stay in South Korea for the next one. And this one, I would say, is a better quality film than Warning, Do Not Play. But the pacing is more of a problem in this one, for sure. But I would still rank it slightly higher in terms of quality. And that is Svaha, The Sixth Finger. 2019, a horror drama. So the story starts with Lee Gum-hwa and her twin sister being born. Now her sister's fetus feeds on her leg, and she's born with a deformed leg. And the sister, referred to as the Thing, that's not very nice, was not expected to make it. Their mother dies shortly after, and their father commits suicide. So this is a pretty tragic beginning to this whole freaking story. So in any case, Gum-hwa now lives in a remote village with her grandparents who had recently moved there and raises dogs for a living. And the sister is kept hidden from the public eye, locked up in the shed in the backyard. Meanwhile, Pastor Park, a man who works at exposing cults, is hired to investigate a mysterious group called Deer Mountain. So that's your setup there. This is glacially paced, this film, and it's tough to understand what the heck is going on for at least half the runtime. But I do think the final half hour is quite good and interesting, and it does bring things together enough. You're constantly wondering why the cult members are doing what they're doing, which is a good thing, keeps you in it, and the ending does provide some answers. It begins with multiple storylines involving multiple people, and they do eventually come together. You really need to pay attention, though, to track everything that's happening and how it all connects. But it's good. Good production values, looks good, performances and direction are solid. Lee Jung-jae stars in this. More of an investigator than a pastor, so kind of an odd character, but he's very energetic and he has a likable attitude. Lots of investigation involving religious belief, cult scriptures regarding demons. It's a combination of Buddhist and Christian content here. And there are a few creepy moments, some occult-based moments, while others include like these creepy spirits and demons or deformed humans. There's a scene with hanging bodies that's pretty cool as well. So this has got some creepiness to it for sure. But you definitely need some patience with this one. But it's good quality stuff, so I recommend it. I think this one is more of a fan favorite. I think of all the films that we're covering tonight, The Sixth Finger is probably the one that gets the best reviews from what I've seen from fans. And it is available on Netflix streaming. All right, we got one left, and we're going to Indonesia to finish off the night. I always like to country hop in these videos if we can. And that is The Third Eye Part 2, also known as Mata Batin 2, from Indonesia. So we have Alia decides to start a new life by living in an orphanage owned by Mrs. Lakshmi and Mr. Fadli, as well as doing social work there. But she feels that there's something wrong with this orphanage. Moreover, Nadia, one of the orphans, can hear mysterious voices asking for help from all over the walls of the house. Well, this is not a good situation, folks. Then disasters begin, and crap hits the fan, and they have to try to save the orphanage. So this was directed by Rocky Soraya, who also directed the first film, the first Third Eye film, and the lead actress also returns, okay? This Rocky Soraya guy must have like a contract with Netflix, because I think we've covered like half a dozen of his movies that were released on Netflix alone, just, the past handful of years. But the opening scenes in this one are a little bit surprising, actually. I liked it. And this movie is pretty relentless near the beginning. Similar to horror films from Thailand during the mid-2000s, there's just a bunch of scares. They just throw scares at you, just over and over again. You know what I mean? Which, if you want a popcorn movie, this is pretty good. You get some background scares, poltergeist-style scenes, seance scenes, visions, spirit possession scenes, bloody violence, alternate dimension scenes. Like, they just throw everything at the wall, really. I like the scene with the ghost, the child ghost in the hoodie. I like how the protagonist uses a drinking glass to hear the ghosts and spirits. There are a few cheap jump scares, but not too many. Not too many. But there is one great kill scene near the end of this movie. It's memorable. It could be the most memorable horror scene of any film we've covered tonight, really. It all sounds so generic what I'm saying, but the direction is what makes it work. This guy's pretty good. The pacing makes it work. And camera work uses a lot of like tracking shots and rotating shots. Makes it energetic. Lighting's pretty good. Give blues and warm tans. Contrast one another very well. And there are 2 extended scenes with dark pink lighting, which I especially liked. I like color in my horror movies, if you couldn't tell. Music is ominous enough. And then there's some cool architecture. Exterior and interior architecture at the orphanage. So yes, I did actually do, I believe, a separate YouTube video for this one back in the day, a handful of years ago. So if you want more details, check out my review. But I like this one. If you want a popcorn horror flick, this could be the best one of this video, or the most purely entertaining one of the video. And it's available on Netflix, like most of Rocky's movies. So, yeah, I would say as an assessment this evening, I would say, if you're a big fan of Takashi Shimizu, you're probably going to watch Howling Village no matter what. Decent, pretty good flick. If you want something more creative, you go with maybe Dancing Mary. If you want a good 2-part film where you watch the one part and then you watch the second and reassess interests, check out Black Maiden if you could get your hands on it. And then I would say The Six Fingers, probably the best quality film of this list, and The Third Eye 2 is the most purely entertaining, probably. But I also liked Warning Do Not Play as well. So like I said, more entertaining movies we're covering today. But you're going to have to use your own judgment and taste to figure out which of these you really want to check out. Okay, depending on what you're feeling. But again, we're ramping up. Next video, part 3, we're going to have all good movies. And then part 4, we get to the best stuff. So I'll be releasing those, in the upcoming weeks. And, yes, be sure to join me next time when I cover part 3. And then we'll crack into that next batch of films. And as always, folks, I'll see you next time.